Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mansion House. Like all Lord Mayors, I live here during my year of office, and we're immensely fortunate to do so and to welcome around 40,000 visitors here every year. Now, I should perhaps make it clear that the private apartments upstairs have rooms which are rather smaller than these ones here, and particularly the Egyptian Hall next door. If that was used for family breakfasts, it would need a telephone link between the opposite ends of the table to get the marmalade. We're here today to celebrate the end of a successful and intellectually demanding series of lectures on Islamic finance and the importance of ethical and social responsibility in financial services. The organisers, the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies and Fajr Capital, have done what London and Oxford are so good at doing, bringing together people from across the world to share views and experience, to do business and to learn from each other. So it's a special pleasure to welcome friends from the Middle East and Asia. They're not only here to discuss issues around Sharia-compliant finance and the need for business to have an ethical and sustainable framework, they can also review the investments and commitments they have made in the UK using Islamic techniques and instruments. Because the British economy takes an openness to overseas investment seriously. Open markets, international trade, mutual capital flows are at the heart of our economy. And that openness extends to Sharia-compliant finance and the professional services that support it. Now, I don't want to fall into the trap of quoting stats, but I will reinforce my key messages. There is a critical mass here of Islamic financial institutions offering wholesale banking services, asset and wealth management. Increasingly takaful and re-takaful, they are regulated by the same agencies as conventional firms, the PRA and the FCA under the Bank of England, with the same standards applied on capital adequacy, governance and KYC or Know Your Client and transparency. Sharia-compliant business gets neither an easy ride nor a harder one. It gets equal treatment. They are supported by law firms, accountants, and a growing community of scholars and highly regarded courses, including an MBA in Islamic finance at our own CAS Business School, a few minutes' walk up the road, with due acknowledgement, of course, to our friends from Oxford. The recent successful issue of the UK sovereign Sukuk provided liquidity and a pricing benchmark, paving the way, perhaps, for many more such issues linked, particularly to infrastructure. The view here is that Islamic finance has grown because it's found ways to work and deliver both benefit to the user and profit to the provider, which all business should do. And some of that benefit, or part of the added value, is in the ethical and sustainable framework in which Sharia-compliant business is done, and also should be done. Just as all business, especially financial services, need to restate its ethical dimension. Business growing, business making money is a public good. It does not need to apologise for itself, but it does need to restate its commitment to high standards of corporate behaviour, of professionalism, and other aspects of responsibility which you've been discussing throughout your lectures. Now, I've just returned from a visit to the Gulf, where I went around 6 countries. And it was just after the oil price basically came down from $105 to around 38. And of course, a lot of the treasuries, a lot of the finance ministries were looking as to how they were going to continue with their infrastructure budgets. They nearly all decided that they weren't going to change their expenditure. But it's absolutely fascinating. We've now got a number of countries which previously had surpluses looking at potentially having deficits. And this is an ideal opportunity for them to start looking and using the Sukuk market. And what I would say to you is that it's like going to see your bank manager. You go and see your bank manager when you don't need to borrow money, because you know when you do need to borrow money, he won't be around. And at the moment, not many of the Gulf countries have established their yield curve. And that is something which we in the international bond markets effectively like to see. So all I'm saying to you now is I think there's an enormous opportunity for a number of countries to start using the international markets, not necessarily to raise money to fund their infrastructure, but to establish where they are on that yield curve. And that is particularly important and it probably should be a mixture of Islamic finance and conventional finance. So thank you again for choosing to come here to celebrate the completion of the series, and I look forward to meeting many of you in your professional roles, not just this evening, but in the years ahead. Now, finally, I'd like to say, I am a child of the East. I was born in Johor Bahru. I have a huge empathy with our Malaysian friends here today. Thank you all very much for coming over, and I shall now hand over to Dr. Farham Nizami, Director of the Oxford Centre. Dr. Nizami.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a very great pleasure for me to welcome you all here tonight on behalf of the Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies. But let me start first by expressing my appreciation to the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor of London, Mr. Alan Yarrow, for allowing us to hold this event in these splendid surroundings of the Mansion House, at the heart of London's financial institutions here in the city. It's particularly nice to have so many friends representing such distinguished financial institutions present here. But in particular, I'd like to thank Iqbal Khan and his colleagues at Fajr Capital, who are co-hosting and sponsoring this event. Iqbal is a very old friend, and I'm most grateful to him for his personal support for this event and for many other things that he has taken an interest in the work of the Centre. This joint initiative, in fact, which started last term, Lord Mayor, as you mentioned, was to hold a series of seminars on issues relating to Islamic finance. And here I must mention especially our visiting fellow Tansri Zarina Anwar, who brought the series together, and indeed even our former visiting fellow Nazir Razak, who is here tonight for ensuring the continuing interest at the Centre in Islamic finance. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of the Centre, we are one of the recognized independent centres of the University of Oxford, established for the purpose of promoting through scholarship a better understanding of Islam and Muslim societies generally. Apart from our interest in works in the humanities, particularly, we have a keen interest in developing our expertise in areas of social sciences. And particular area for us is a fellowship that we have in development economics, and now, of course, with Tansri Zarina there, our interest in Islamic finance. But the Centre, in that sense, acts as a bridge of bringing those, the Islamic world and the Western world of scholarship together. And we believe, as we were talking earlier, Lord Mayor, that perhaps Islamic finance is one of those areas where perhaps greater interaction between those engaged with Islamic finance in Muslim societies to understand what goes on in the city would be to mutual benefit. And the Centre would certainly like to play its part in that endeavor. The seminars that we held last year were primarily devoted for this purpose. And we were very fortunate in attracting some very quality speakers and good attendance, both from academics, the student body, and practitioners. And some of them are present here tonight, and I'd like to thank them for their support for that series. I'm glad that Islamic finance is now attracting increasing attention and interest in Oxford. The foundation by Oxford students of an Islamic banking and finance society is a further welcome development, and I know representatives of that society are present here tonight. Our Centre's interest is of much longer standing, and we have a number of initiatives which we hope to extend in the future. Foremost among these is an international roundtable, which we hold annually in cooperation with the Securities Commission in Malaysia. And the next roundtable, in fact, is planned for early March, which will bring to Oxford practitioners, scholars, and academics once again to debate issues relating to sustainability and the balance to be struck in the industry between innovation, profit, and ethical considerations. We have also created with our Malaysian partners at the Securities Commission a visiting fellowship in Islamic finance to enable a scholar to carry out research relevant to the field for an academic year at Oxford. Our current scholar in residence under this program, Dr. Azman, is with us tonight. In the future, we would like, finance permitting, to develop a program of research grants to encourage doctoral and postdoctoral students to pursue research projects and studies of benefit to the wider industry. And I'm convinced that more high-quality research is vital to develop this field further, as the Lord Mayor indicated earlier. Now, last year in June, the British government took an encouraging and pioneering step towards making London a major international centre for Islamic finance by issuing a sovereign sukuk, the first government outside the Muslim world to do so. And I am so pleased that on the other side, the person who was quite closely involved with it, in Tansri Azman Mokhtar, is here with us tonight and will be speaking subsequently. The offering was, I understand, very well received by the markets, and the experiment regarded widely as a successful one. I hope that we can all work together on developing the expertise available to complement that initiative and encourage further positive development. Islamic finance is, of course, of particular importance to Muslims as individuals and to Muslim institutions and governments. It is very welcome, for example, that British students can now apply for Islamically compliant student loans to finance their studies. But I also believe the underlying concepts of shared risk and the balance between ethical considerations and profit deserve to be aired in the context of the wider debate on financial and banking issues, and we will continue in the academic sphere at Oxford to encourage the debate. I would like to assure you that the Centre's interest in this is one that we would like to sustain in the long term, and I hope very much that we would have your active participation in developing this field further. Thank you for coming tonight.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As-salatu was-salam ala ashrafil mursaleen. Sayyidina Maulana Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Amma ba'd. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I send you the greetings of peace, and to all the people who have come from far and wide, there is a greeting which the companions of the Prophet used to give called Qudumun Mubarakun, which means may your footsteps in this great building, beautiful building, be blessed. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a hadith narrated by Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he said he has not thanked God who has not thanked people. So let me begin by first of all thanking the Lord Mayor and your team for welcoming us to your home. We're deeply honored. My second thank goes to my dear friend Farhan Nizami, who was also my house captain, my cricket team captain. So you can imagine he was my boss when I was in school. And he still is. When he says anything, we have to say labbaik. We are ready to obey. This function would not have happened had it not been for the tenacity of Tansri Zarina, who does not know the word no. To those of you who do not know her, she was the first lady who did the first sukuk in its modern time. Shell, Malaysia, issued the sukuk. And behind that sukuk was Tansri Zarina. A lot of people give me credit for the first sovereign sukuk, and I always pass the credit back to Tansri Zarina. So thank you. I also want to thank my colleague Noman and the rest of the team, both at OCIS, who has made this function possible. I am particularly grateful to the speakers who are here, Brother Saria, Dr. Alberto. Those who are not here, Lord Stephen Green, who was also my boss for 9 years at HSBC, Anne Pettifor, and others who have contributed hugely to the success of this series. When we talk about Islamic finance, especially in Britain, and there is so much which has happened, and as I always said, Islamic finance has made it possible to show the best of Britishness, i.e., allowing Muslims to be homeowners, business owners, and leaders in the community without compromising their faith. And I'm reminded to thank someone who is not here, was very dear to me, the late Lord Eddie George, without whom Islamic finance would not be where it is today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, who as Chancellor at an MCB conference in 2003 said, we want to position Britain as the gateway of Islamic finance. And of course, I want to thank our present Prime Minister as well, because we are close to elections. So we cannot forget to thank the current Prime Minister. When Prime Minister David Cameron stood up at the WIAF, it was the first time WIAF took place outside a Muslim country, he said, we mean business. And Britain has issued Sukuk, Britain has made itself the home for 6 Islamic financial institutions. So this support for Islamic finance is bipartisan. It's across parties. It's wonderful to see that. There were many themes which were covered in the lecture series. One of them was connecting the commercial economy with the real economy with the financial economy. The other theme was, how do we create the demonstration effect? And as we were going through these themes and lectures, the team, Tansri Zarina, Numan, myself, we were all wondering who can bring all these themes and talk about it. And then we said, there is one person who we need to request. And the lot fell on Tansri Azman Mokhtar. And we are very, very grateful that Tansri agreed to speak. However, till about an hour ago, I was nervous whether he would come or not. He had to walk past 2 challenges. The first one was the Cambridge and Oxford divide. Being somebody who went to Darwin College at Cambridge, you can imagine how far he has walked. Second, for the last 3 decades, he's been a devoted, committed supporter of Spurs. And as we were speaking, I believe the match has probably just ended. And Tansri has sacrificed the match which Spurs were playing from 6 p.m. today. And I was telling his staff, is he really coming or not? So we are very grateful to you, Tansri. Tansri, I'm also personally indebted to him because over a dinner in Dubai, when I had left HSBC, and Tansri has a reputation, he does not meet bankers when they are bankers. Because way back he said, I have no time for bankers. So when I left HSBC, he met me and we had dinner. And over a napkin, he created the roadmap for a platform to connect real economy with financial economy, East Asia with West Asia, and there was born Fajr Capital. Tansri has been a founding director, and today we are very fortunate by this devoted support of all our shareholders and board members that we have 8 investments in 10 OIC markets, 15,000 staff in the group, $5 billion worth of assets which the group manages, and the company is very, very grateful. Tansri, I am very grateful you gave us this opportunity to create a platform. So without further ado, I would like to invite you to come and share your thoughts and tell us the demonstration effect which Khazanah is creating and will create. Please welcome Tansri Dato Azman Mokhtar.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Wishing you the blessings of peace. The Right Honourable Lord Mayor of London, Alderman Alan Yarrow, indeed born in Johor Bahru. I'm half Johorian, that's on the southern tip of Malaysia. My mother's a Johorian. Very kind introduction from both Brother Farhan and Brother Iqbal. I'm particularly humbled to be here, having been, before Cambridge, a student who studied his accountancy here, not far from here in London, and to speak in such an august gathering in this hall is indeed a real honor. I should learn to read fine print a bit better. So as usual, Iqbal said, Tan Sri, would you come and speak? I thought it was a panel, so I had to do some homework to do justice to the event. So I hope I do not disappoint you. I should give a caveat right up front that I am not a scholar, nor can I claim to be an expert in Islamic finance. I happen to run the sovereign fund of Malaysia, Khazanah. As many of you know, the word Khazanah means treasure or treasury. But fortunate enough to have worked with, for, on behalf of many of you today, this evening. And in that regard, I'm also humbled, and I did read, or most of it at least, the papers that were presented in the lecture series. Professor Iqbal Asaria, Dr. Anne Pettiford, Lord Green, Dr. Alberto Brugnoni, and last but not least, Iqbal Khan himself. So ladies and gentlemen, I again, in the time available, I would not risk trying to summarize all of that. All I can offer is really some experiences and trying to relate between the financial economy and the real economy, I think was the brief that I was given. And indeed, I'd like to propose today, as I stand here in the city of London, it's been about, I believe, about 6 years since the Lehman crisis. And that particular crisis from 2008 onwards has been called many things. The Great Recession, the restructuring or the realignment. But today I wanted to talk about the Great Reclamation. And the thesis I'd like to kind of put forward for your consideration, for our mutual consideration, is how do we reclaim the financial commons? The financial commons imply that the commons, our community, has the problem of the commons in these financial times. I think can be defined that the financialization of the economy, has resulted in a lot of the issues that we see today, from not just financial volatility, but into inequality and ultimately into issues around social injustice. Some of these issues are clearly outside my field as a manager of money on behalf of Malaysians. We sometimes say that we have 30 million shareholders. I think that's the number of Malaysians. Actually, that's not quite true. We actually have more than that because those who are not born yet. And then we have to consider those who have gone, on which we are, that we are building this particular fund. We manage about 45 billion ringgit. We control more than $100 billion. Sorry, not ringgit. Sorry, $45 billion, more than $100 billion of assets. But beyond that, I think 40% of our assets now are outside Malaysia. So that means wherever we go, whether in near where we are in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in ASEAN, in China, in India, in Turkey, in the Middle East, and increasingly I think we've opened offices as far away as San Francisco to basically move all this together. Today, I'm also, maybe this is the best place to announce that I think we've made a decision that, inshallah, over the next 6 to 12 months, Khazanah will also open an office in London. And I think this, Lord Mayor and your team, I hope If anything, London suffers, quote unquote, from being too familiar for Malaysians, that we don't really need an office here. But I think the time has come, as indeed some of our companies are already here. Now, reclaiming the financial commons, I just wanted to postulate maybe just 3 points. I know this is an evening speech. I'd like to keep it short, but perhaps to explain. Islamic finance, the various speakers have summarized it in great detail in the lecture series. I'm sure this is available on the OCIS website, on the lecture series website. But essentially, not just Muslims, but increasingly at the time post-Lehman, the discussions around the real economy, I come from the investment line, discussions around not just responsible investing, but impact investing, are increasingly moving towards what exactly is the role of money and what is the role of firms. There's a lot of discussion on this. I think the perversion of the role of money, I think all this has been eloquently described, that money, the purpose of money and the purpose of finance is to serve the real economy. And the purpose of the real economy is to serve society in turn. And the ultimate purpose of all this has to be a common prosperity and social justice. Now, along the way, the financialization of the economy is really what we need to begin to try and reclaim. Islamic finance has a comprehensive system that involves not just banking, but it involves the capital markets, and so on and so forth. Malaysia, 30 over years ago, the deputy chairman of Khazanah was one of the key people, but Bank Negara and others helped develop the first wave, the first generation through Islamic banking. Iqbal and others, many of you participated in that. Capital markets was the second wave or the second generation. As we move from 2G to 3G, I think this is where we need to convert and really look at a more total system involving institutions and instruments such as wakaf, zakat, insurance, and other forms of financial inclusion. And indeed, it should go beyond that into 4G. There's some discussion, for example, on crowdfunding in Islamic finance. I think that's an extremely inclusive use of technology that lends itself to Islamic finance. So to consider 3 key points. The first, Islamic finance has been described, is in my view, a great utopia, not to say it cannot be achieved, but in its ideal form, it's a comprehensive system that if followed, then all these issues I think we can address in a very holistic manner. The issue is not so much the utopia. I'm speaking to a group who believe in a lot of this, the system. The issue is how do we implement, even if we wanted to. And first of all, Islamic financial assets, by some estimates, is about 1.7 trillion US dollars. This is data from Thomson Reuters. The total global financial assets is about 225 trillion US dollars. This data from McKinsey. So the simple math will tell you that it's under 1%. And the nature of the so-called conventional system is it basically allows money creation in a fairly unbridled manner. And therefore, this is not really going to make that much of a difference. But it's not about numbers. So how do you chase utopia in a deeply dystopian system? The genie has already gone out of the bottle, so to speak. We saw this, the macroeconomists from among you will know that the Nixonian moment in 1971, when the United States decided to leave the gold standard and started essentially printing money post the Vietnam War. And of course, this has grown even further. And if people track the financial liberalization from the Stanford School, McKinnon and Shaw, and so on and so forth, and this has really grown. I mean, the late Lord Tobin, the Nobel laureate, that must have been 20 years ago, was already talking about the need to do a Tobin tax to put sand into the wheels of finance just to slow it down. That was 20 over years ago. And today, and this is before the outburst of the whole derivative system and so on and so forth. Now, so the ability of the United States and the reserve currency, and now increasingly in Europe, in other jurisdictions, to even print money in the first place suggests that whatever effort we're going to be, let's be very clear, this is nice. I'm a complete believer in Islamic finance, but it's small. It's perhaps not even 1% of the system, notwithstanding Muslims are 1/5 or even 1/4 population and assets, etc. Right? So that's the first point I just wanted to get across, so that we're clear to try and frame this. The second part is the 6 years within that, 6 years after Lehman, I'm afraid the conclusion on banking is it is not capable of reforming itself. And we just look at all the headlines and just this week and so on as I arrive in the United Kingdom. But regulation, then the issues around that, crowdfunding, the use of technology, but yet we see Wonga.com, etc., payday funding, credit, and so on and so forth. So Islamic finance, while it is not part of the problem, I think this is perhaps slightly critical, but it's in the spirit of being constructive. I think, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I think it is also honest to say we are not as yet, at least, part of the total solution, because there is a lot of issues still. Islamic finance, and just to get to the third and final point, is really the great reclamation is really trying to reclaim and trying to graduate from, for example, just managing liability, which essentially what sukuk is about. We issue a lot of sukuks. They tell us it's all very good. We win a lot of awards, actually. But to be clear, that's only one part of the balance sheet, right, which is the liability side. What are we doing about the asset side? So to move from liability management to equity investing, to move from risk transfer or risk aversion to risk sharing, as we know, from the school and thinking of investing to move from simply do no harm to try and do some good. Khazanah works closely with institutions such as the United Nations with its principles for responsible investing. We work with World Economic Forum and Davos on impact investing. I think this is where the thinking, there is a convergence of thinking from the old classical Islamic finance thinking and the mainstream, actually not quite mainstream, I think they're still on the periphery, thinking in terms of investing from just doing no harm to doing some good. We need to move from Islamic finance to Islamic economics. Certainly it means we need to move from financial economy to the real economy, and ultimately to move from exclusion to inclusion, and to move from an acquisitive system, not quite sure what that is, but anyway, to a more distributive system. Now, in the case of Khazanah, maybe these are all big principles. Maybe I'd just like to share how we go about doing it. In Khazanah, the way we call it, we have two keys to essentially unlock what we do. The first key is a financial key, which like any fund manager will need to do, which is essentially to make money. Thankfully, in the last 10 years, we've more than trebled the funds. It's growing at a very healthy 12%, on a risk, threshold or risk level that is fairly manageable. But that's not enough. That's the second key. The second key is to help create developmental value or strategic value, creation of jobs, making sure we act as a catalyst in terms of building supply chains, building supplier bases. We make sure that we do this in a way that is, of course, environmentally sustainable. We do it in a way that empowers employees, make sure that they have enough and be able to work for their families and so on and so forth. We do CSR. There's a lot of work in terms of capacity building. In a way, Khazanah as a sovereign fund reflects somewhat Malaysia's own philosophy in terms of economics. If Khazanah is indeed the sovereign wealth manager of Malaysia. Malaysia itself has grown in our 57 years of existence on the mantra of growth with equity, the ability to grow for long periods, but yet to be able to redistribute this. This is challenging, but last year, I think Bank Negara, our central bank, just announced we grew at 6% per annum, which is, by any measure, pretty good. On the other hand, the Prime Minister, Dato Sri Najib himself, has highlighted that people just don't seem to believe these numbers because on the ground, people are not feeling it. And in fact, he has quite eloquently articulated the difference between what he calls a capital economy, which is represented by things like GDP and stock market, and the people economy. So how do we bridge this? You could say the people economy is perhaps the real economy. So Malaysia is doing, for example, our new economic model, it's been around for like the last 5 years or so, talks about 3 circles. How do we circle the 3 circles of growth, but with inclusion and sustainability? This is perhaps a challenge of our times. So, some practical thoughts. For Khazanah, which is the area I can claim to have some expertise, if we want to do this great reclamation and recognize that we're trying to do this when Islamic finance, which I believe is a solution, but it is still a very small part of the system. It's under 1%. But perhaps the demonstration effect that Iqbal and others have spoken about. If Khazanah goes out and makes sure that whatever we invest in, we make sure that, first of all, we do no harm, we make a healthy financial and fair financial return, and we impact and do some good. I think this is a big part of it, and it is extremely risk-sharing because it is on the equity side, and we finance ourselves on the liability side very sensibly and do this in an ethical fashion. Now, very quickly, there is a project called Project Kronos. It just happens to be a name. Project Kronos is a somewhat audacious attempt that my colleagues are trying to find the karma, if you like, the eureka moment of what is true value in a company. And this is slightly crazy, in fact. We've discussed this with the United Nations, with the World Bank, with Dean Tufano at the Syed School in Oxford, and he's intrigued. In fact, when I sit with a bunch of academics, I said there's a Nobel Prize to be won here. What is true value? The capital asset pricing model. So you have to start these things really with the intellectual dimension of trying to figure out what is true value. Because if you really cut into that, you have to ask the question, what is the role of business? What exactly is the role of business? In the old days, the shareholder value movement was very fashionable maybe 10 years ago. But after Lehman, I think that's been largely discredited. In fact, on top of that, it's been captured by financial interests and so on and so forth. We know that. Now, we try to value not just the market value, then we ask what economic impact do they give. So a power utility, for example, is now the largest company in Malaysia. It's our company, Tenaga. It's worth 85 billion ringgit, but do they burn too much fossil fuel, for example? That negative externality will be deducted from their number. What do they do in terms of their staff? What is their stance on governance, on corruption? And what is their stance on making sure that the system in terms of building, for example, local supplier bases in terms of labor standards within those supplier bases and so on and so forth. We're working with Pricewaterhouse, and they say that this cannot be, some people say this cannot be done. But those of you who are in the accounting line, for example, we know that depreciation is indeed just an estimate, and there will be subject matter experts to do this. 7 companies out of 70 major companies at Khazanah are on a pilot today, and I hope within the next couple of years, every company in Khazanah is going to be measured, and we're going to report back to the Malaysian people to explain this. I've also discussed it with Dato Ranjit and Tan Sri Zarina's successor at the SC, and he's quite excited. That's one example. We do quite a bit of CSR, and I'm attracted to the ideas of Dr. Schiller, another Nobel laureate. So Rob Schiller basically says, with the financial crisis, we should have more, not less, financial innovation of the right type, obviously, and the use of financial innovation. So I'm pleased to maybe announce and confirm that I think we have submitted to the Securities Commission to issue 1 billion ringgit, so that's roughly maybe slightly less than 200 million pounds, to do a program, to do a social impact sukuk, to fund our work in education reforms for something called trust schools, which are essentially public-private partnerships, not unlike the charter schools in the United States. It's a program. We won't need the full 200 million pounds straight away, where essentially people are going to put money on a certain benchmark rate of return, but the better the schools do, they get less money, and they can convert whatever they put in from essentially a good loan into a charity, a donation. And inshallah, I think this in the next 1 or 2 months you will see this coming out. We studied what the UK did with, I believe it was a social impact bonds for prison, if I'm not mistaken, for the prison system. A small example of how structuring can be done as a force for good. Khazanah could fund all of that on our own, but we wanted to open this up, and and there are actually a lot of people and charities and trusts and family offices that wanted to participate. I think ultimately this great reclamation, as I call it, of trying to reclaim, has to start. I think we should not be perturbed by the size of the challenge and so on. I think what is more important is actually to do it right, even if it's small, because I think that demonstration effect will, I think, go well beyond that. And I'm speaking to you today, perhaps 8 years ago, before the Lehman crisis, this conversation would not be as poignant in that sense. At a time when I believe the West and indeed the world is looking for answers on what to do and how to reclaim the financialization of our economies and our societies. And indeed, Islamic finance, offering itself as a wisdom, as a divine wisdom, Muslims believe that it's really a mercy to not just Muslims, but it really belongs to the whole world, to everyone. I think in that regard, we Muslims ourselves also got a reclamation project. We need to reclaim our deen, our religion. If in the first case, the economies have been hijacked by the financial terrorists and financial extremists who basically financialize everything, I think Muslims, we of course also have a duty and a great responsibility. And inshallah, I see this convergence of all these forces coming together. And indeed, I think it's great for me, alhamdulillah, to be able to speak here in London. This is a city, the capital of not just capital, but the capital of ideas, where ideas collide and ideas compete. And indeed, I think the greatness of the City of London is indeed, for example, Khazanah is a member of the International Sovereign Wealth Fund Association, and we spent about 3 years arguing where the capital, or rather the head office of the IS, International Sovereign Wealth Fund, should be. Anything between the Middle East and Beijing and Norway and Singapore. Malaysia didn't volunteer because I don't think it was that important. Anyway, in the end, it landed on London as a site where everybody could agree, and considering the UK does not have its own sovereign wealth fund per se, I think that tells us something. So ladies and gentlemen, finally, to recap, I think to me, the issues of Islamic finance and how to bridge between the financial and the real economy, and to be more specific, to reclaim the economy itself. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, it's easy to just say, oh, okay, this is all great, this is all, but this is the utopia that we're trying to chase in a very dystopian world. It's all a little bit bleak, but that's what it is. We'll end on a positive note. Islamic finance, with some caveats, is not part of the problem, but it is not yet part of the full solution, which is essentially, then the final part is really, this is a call to action, actually. We start small, but we start with meaningful initiatives. In the limited time available, I tried to describe just a few things of what we're trying to do. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, with much congratulations to Dr. Farhan and Iqbal Khan on the great work of this lecture series. May it continue for a long time, but more importantly, may it lead to a call for action in what I would like to propose to call the Great Reclamation. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Tan Sri, thank you so much for the call of action and the great reclamation. You have certainly set the agenda for the next decade for Islamic finance to create a demonstration effect. There is a battle for the soul of capitalism going on. And we've always said that Islamic finance is but capitalism with a moral perspective. And you talked about the connection of the financial economy and the real economy, creating the demonstration effect, the great reclamation. I think the message will go out from this hall to all the centers of Islamic finance, and inshallah, much good will come out of it. Thank you for gracing this occasion, and I do hope that your team won, and it wins the match on Sunday as well. So all of you, please, irrespective of which team you support, pray for Spurs to win on Wembley. With that, I thank each and every one of you for coming over. It's been a great honor and privilege on behalf of the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies and Fajr Capital. Thank you for sparing your evening. Great to have you. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.